Take the plunge and listen to Guernsey Deep Dive. Don't forget to like, share, and follow.
Picture the scene. The quiet coastline of Guernsey, early morning light, and then a burnt-out car, sort of, still smoldering.
Right.
Inside, the horrifying discovery of charred human remains, and chillingly, nearby, lies a shotgun. Okay, let's unpack this, because this isn't fiction. It's the real and deeply unsettling death of Mikus Alps.
A Latvian national who'd made his life in Guernsey, Mikus Alps' death back in January 2018, it immediately presented a puzzle.
Definitely.
We've looked into the initial news reports, the ones that broke the story, and also a more detailed investigative piece.
Okay.
And what's interesting is how these sources offer different levels of information and sometimes, subtly different perspectives on what might have gone down.
Exactly. Our goal here isn't really to solve a cold case, because as you'll see, the mystery, it definitely endures, but to really dissect the known facts, the persistent unknowns, and the various theories that has sort of swirled around Mikus Alps. Was this a tragic accident? Was it suicide?
Maybe something else entirely.
Or could something far more sinister be behind it? And considering his very strong support for Ukraine, is that a thread we need to follow? Let's get into it.
Okay, so the initial discovery is where it all kicks off. Early January 2018, close to Pete's Bot.
Right, on Guernsey South Coast.
Exactly. A burnt-out Volvo was found, and crucially, this vehicle was registered to Mikus Alps.
Okay.
Now, what's significant, I think, is the delay in actually identifying the remains.
Yeah, that struck me too.
Because the car was so thoroughly destroyed and apparently posed no immediate reignition risk. They just left it untouched for 2 full days.
2 days, wow. You can imagine the questions even then.
Absolutely. It wasn't until Mikus Alps was actually reported missing
Okay.
that the authorities went back to the scene and then found skeletal remains inside in the driver's seat.
And it took DNA.
It took DNA evidence to finally confirm his identity.
Yeah.
And adding to this grim picture, they also found the remains of a shotgun.
Registered to him.
Registered to Alps, yes. And evidence that one shot had been fired.
And this, for me, is where the initial questions just really start to pile up,
Sure. So the inquest, which wrapped up in November 2019, it gives us some official findings, but, it also highlights the enduring uncertainty.
How so?
The Home Office pathologist determined the cause of death was a shotgun wound to the head.
Okay, cause of death established.
Right. But the crucial outcome of the inquest was an open verdict.
An open verdict, meaning?
Meaning the coroner simply could not definitively determine if that wound was self-inflicted or not.
Right. So they couldn't say suicide, couldn't say homicide.
Exactly. The key takeaway here for you is that even after a thorough investigation, lots of expert analysis, the authorities just couldn't definitively categorize his death. It really highlights the profound uncertainty we're dealing with here.
An open verdict, it just leaves so many possibilities hanging there, doesn't it? And it wasn't like a quick decision either, was it? They brought in specialists.
Oh, absolutely. They consulted with the Home Office pathologist, whose initial thoughts are quite interesting, as well as experts in ballistics, anthropology, and forensic radiology.
Okay, so covering all the bases. Ballistics for the gun.
Yeah, analyzing the shotgun, the shot's trajectory. Anthropologists would examine the skeletal remains, looking for any other trauma.
Besides the obvious.
Right, beyond the gunshot or the fire damage.
Yep.
And forensic radiologists use imaging, like x-rays maybe, to find details you might not see otherwise.
And that initial observation you mentioned from the pathologist, the one about a fire-damaged body, burnt-out car, shotgun, often suggesting others were involved, that sounds pretty significant.
It is, yeah. It's a strong starting point. However, the subsequent expert analysis, it had to factor in the body's condition, the shotgun's position in the wreckage, all that.
Okay.
And this later analysis, it actually presented 2 possible scenarios for how that fatal wound happened.
2 scenarios.
Yeah. And only one of those could potentially have been self-inflicted. But here's the critical point. The experts couldn't definitively favor one scenario over the other.
So the physical evidence alone wasn't enough.
It just couldn't provide a conclusive answer. Left them stuck, essentially.
So you have this initial expert hint towards possible foul play, but ultimately the evidence couldn't lock it down, leaving both suicide and homicide technically possible.
Precisely.
And then you layer on the toxicology results. Traces of MDMA, amphetamine, butylone, which I gather was a fairly new synthetic stimulant then?
Yeah, relatively new at the time. And also the anti-inflammatory drug diclofenac were found in his remains.
So quite a cocktail of substances in his system.
Which undeniably complicates the picture further.
Yeah.
You have to ask, could these substances have influenced his state of mind, his actions?
It's a factor you can't ignore.
Definitely something investigators had to consider. But despite his known past history of depression and this somber and reflective letter that emerged later.
We'll get to that letter.
Yeah. The pathologist stated there was no firm evidence to definitively suggest suicidal intent right at that particular moment.
Okay. And then, almost inevitably, given the timing and Mikus Alps' very vocal support for Ukraine, the rumors started, didn't they, about Russian involvement?
Indeed. And Guernsey police did look into these rumors. They explored potential links between his activism and his death. Ultimately, they found no concrete evidence, nothing solid to substantiate those claims.
And what about the claims from friends, hearing another voice on his last calls?
Similar situation. Some friends reported hearing someone else, maybe with a foreign accent, during those final calls. But again, the police investigation just couldn't confirm it.
Right. Let's shift focus a bit, talk about Mikus Alps himself. Who was he? Latvian national, moved to Guernsey back in 2005.
Yeah. Sources describe him as hardworking and driven, someone his friends saw as a reliable friend.
Okay.
He ran a car parts business. Seems like he dismantled vehicles, sold the components, tried to make a go of it.
Sounds like it, but it wasn't all smooth sailing?
No. The sources also detailed that in the months leading up to his death, he was facing pretty significant financial problems.
Like what kind of problems?
Well, reports say he owed his employees wages and had racked up considerable debt.
And we also know about the recreational drug use from the toxicology.
Exactly. That's in the mix, too.
Yeah.
And could certainly have contributed to his difficulties, one way or another.
And emotionally. Seems it had struggles before. Mention of suicidal thoughts after a breakup in 2015.
Yes, that's mentioned. So there was a history there, some indication of, let's say, potential mental health vulnerabilities in the past.
But then contrasting with that, you have this incredibly strong, very active commitment to Ukraine.
This is a really critical part of the story, I think. Alps wasn't just passively supporting Ukraine. He was very vocal, very active in the conflict with Russia.
He ran a Facebook page.
Yeah, Help Ukrainian Defenders, CI. And he took a very hands-on approach, organizing and personally delivering military supplies. Actually went out there.
So Ukraine.
Yes, to the 8th Ukrainian Battalion. Made multiple trips in 2017. There were even some, unconfirmed claims suggesting he might have actually participated in combat.
Wow. So he was really involved.
Deeply involved. It seems like a profound personal commitment, way beyond just clicking like online.
That level of dedication is significant. And it makes sense then that some of his Ukrainian comrades claimed he'd received threats because of it.
It certainly adds weight to those theories about external factors, doesn't it?
It really does. Now, let's circle back to this somber and reflective letter that came out after the investigation started.
Right. Forensic handwriting analysis confirmed it was definitely written by Mikus Alps.
So it's genuinely his words.
Yes. And this letter, it becomes a really key piece when you try to understand his state of mind around that time.
And it sounded like a will?
That's how a friend who saw it described it. More like a will. Apparently, he wrote about feeling like he'd be in a better place and gave really specific instructions about his possessions, like leaving money to the Ukrainian Defense Army and also to an ex-girlfriend.
And specifying where he wanted his ashes scattered.
Yes, even that level of detail. It definitely has the feel of someone, putting their affairs in order.
But the way it was delivered is strange too, isn't it?
Very intriguing, yeah. It wasn't found at the scene, wasn't sent straight to the police or family.
So how did it surface?
It was given to a friend, a tattoo artist known as Chalky, but by a third party.
A third party, not Alps himself.
Apparently not directly. And it came with these very specific instructions. Only open it at the appropriate time.
Wow. That adds another layer of, mystery, almost like a prearranged plan, but the intention behind it is still so unclear.
Exactly.
Let's try to reconstruct his very last known movements. Last seen alive early hours of January 8th.
That's right. The evening before, January 7th, he visited that friend, Chalky. Reportedly seemed calm.
And that's when he handed over the package with the letter inside.
Well, that's when the package containing the letter was given to Chalky, apparently via that third party, with those instructions about opening it. Then later, Mikus woke his mother early on the 8th, just said he was going out.
And the phone data, where did that place him?
His mobile phone signal pinged near his business garage between about 1:20 a.m. and 3:08 a.m. on January 8th.
Okay. And those calls we mentioned?
He made those two calls around 2:46 a.m. and 3:29 a.m. And it's during these calls that friends reported maybe hearing other voices.
But that couldn't be confirmed.
Couldn't be verified, no.
Yeah.
Then, around 4:09 a.m., his phone signal just vanished, lost completely.
And there was some odd WhatsApp activity, too.
Yeah, briefly online on January 7th, after being offline for a bit, sent a message saying he'd just woken up.
Okay.
And apparently made a pretty dark joke about his own funeral party.
It's almost like, well, maybe the sense of foreboding. Or maybe just very dark humor to cope with something. It's hard to say.
It is. These circumstances leading up to his death, they're just filled with these ambiguities, these gray areas. Adds to the whole mystery.
Which brings us right back to those crucial unanswered questions. The biggest one, obviously, was that fatal gunshot wound self-inflicted? Or did someone else pull the trigger?
And as we've said, the expert analysis just couldn't conclude either way. The evidence didn't point definitively in one direction.
And the fire itself started in the front passenger compartment. We know that.
Right. But was the driver's door open? Details like that could be significant for the sequence of events, but they seem to remain unclear from the sources we have.
Then there are those unexplained fractures in both his arms.
Yes. Possibly heat-related from the intense fire, but that wasn't definitively confirmed either. Just another little detail adding complexity to the forensic side.
And we can't forget the claims from his friend, Chalky, believing Mikas was being followed, threatened by Russians.
Yeah, and that alleged note left on his car with 200 written on it. Supposedly a Russian criminal code, meaning he was a target.
Did the police find anything there?
They investigated it, yes.
Yeah.
But ultimately couldn't find any concrete proof to back up those claims.
So in the end, the police investigation closed, open verdict. Just not enough conclusive evidence either way.
That's the official outcome. But it's clear, reading between the lines and from what's reported, that some friends, some associates, they remain deeply skeptical about the suicide theory.
And there was that other investigation too, wasn't there? Unrelated, but maybe relevant context?
Well, yeah. A separate investigation uncovered that Mikus Alps had been involved in possessing illegal firearms and also supplying controlled drugs in the time leading up to his death.
Really?
Yes. A friend who was apparently storing some of these guns for him was actually jailed because of it.
Okay, so that reveals another, maybe more complex, darker side to his life and activities. Could that be relevant?
It's another potential factor, another thread. Could his death be linked to that somehow? It's impossible to rule out entirely, adds another layer of possibility.
Right. And then, just to add to the confusion, there was activity on his Facebook account after he died.
Yes. Understandably, that just fueled all sorts of conspiracy theories, People suggesting maybe he'd faked his own death somehow.
But the police had an explanation.
Their take was that it was most likely someone else who had gained access to his account, maybe unauthorized access.
Okay. So, like we said at the start, just so many unresolved threads tangled up in this story.
So to try and bring it all together, Mikus Alps died from a shotgun wound in a car that was then completely destroyed by fire.
Yeah.
The fundamental question that remains unanswered is suicide or foul play?
And the open verdict from the inquest really just hammers home how conflicting, how ultimately inconclusive all the available information is.
Exactly. You've got factors on one side, the financial problems, the history of depression, that letter that reads like a will, things that could potentially point towards suicide.
But then you weigh that against the initial expert opinion hinting at foul play, the fact that even later analysis couldn't rule it out.
The drugs in his system, his very strong, potentially risky activism for Ukraine, those alleged threats.
Those unsettling final phone calls, the possibility someone else was there.
It paints a picture that is just far more complex. It raises so many more questions than it answers, really.
Yeah. And even though the police found no hard evidence linking his Ukraine support directly to his death,
the suspicions, the concerns, especially among people who knew him, they definitely linger. That open verdict, it truly just encapsulates the enduring mystery of this whole case. Life ending violently, shrouded in fire, and just a multitude of unresolved questions.
And that open verdict, it really makes you think, doesn't it, about the weight of that kind of uncertainty. What does it actually mean when a life ends, and the how and why remains so completely unclear?
Yeah.
What kind of closure is even possible for the people left behind when you just can't know for sure? It's a deeply unsettling thought to leave you with.
Thanks for listening to Guernsey Deep Dive. Don't forget to follow for the latest updates. Any questions or queries, email guernseydeepdive@gmail.com.